Berachot Habaot. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to really get into it. Last week we did a little bit of introduction. The rabbi was here, gave us an overview. This week we're going to get started with the meat of the matter. Okay, so we're starting Masechta Berachot, which is the very first Masechta in the Gemara, and we're starting on the very first page, which is page 2. Right, and that's a thing. All the books start always page 2 because you shouldn't think that you know so much you don't even know page 1. So we're starting on page 2. That's sort of a convention. That's the way it works. So we start with the Mishnah, and as we said, the Mishnah is very compact, very concise, and then the Gemara expands upon it. The Mishnah preceded the Gemara by a couple hundred years. So the Mishnah starts, Me'ei Masai Korin Eshma Ba'arvin. From when? When is the proper time to read Kriya Shema? When do we say Kriya Shema? And we know we say Shema Yisrael in the morning and in the evening. What is the right time to do it in the evening? So the Mishnah says, Mishah Shah Kohanim Nichnasim La'achol B'Trumosan Ad Sof Ha'ashmura Harishona. From the time that the Kohanim come home, basically, to eat their Truma, until the end of the first third of the night. Divrei Rabbi Eliezer. So says Rabbi Eliezer. And whenever you have a situation where an individual is named, generally speaking, that means that somebody else is going to disagree with him. Okay? So you have, many times in the Mishnah, there is no author listed. And when that happens, typically it's going to be Rabbi Meir, because he was the one who compiled the whole thing. But it could be others as well, but generally speaking, if there's no author, no attribution, it means it's basically that's the accepted opinion. So when you have a name mentioned, Rabbi Eliezer said that it works from the time that the Kohanim come and eat the Truma, we're going to discuss what that means, until the end of the first third of the night. So says Rabbi Eliezer. V'chachamim omrim ad chatzos. Chachamim, which is the majority opinion, say that it's until chatzos Chetzi, right? Half, which would mean midnight, right? In the middle of the night, right? Rabban Gamliel Omer, Ad Sheyala Amud HaShachar. Now, Rabban Gamliel said until dawn, till the morning light. So, part of what we'd like to do here is to, not just to sort of give you the dry words, but who are these people? When did they live? What was going on in the world? So, I'm going to ask Sharon to read on the lower left-hand side of your page. There's a little description about a little biography of Rabban Gamliel. You see it on the lower right-hand side, Sharon.
That must be on the English side.
And the other, if you're starting from the English side, on the lower right, it says personalities.
On the English side?
From the English side, right? So let us know a little bit about Rabban Gamliel, who he was.
Yeah.
Find it, Sharon?
What's page 7? Yeah.
Rabban Gamliel. The print is very small.
Yeah, it is.
Nasi of the Sanhedrin and one of the most important Tanaim in the period following the destruction of the Second Temple. Rabban Gamliel's father, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the elder, had also been Nasi of the Sanhedrin, as well as one of the leaders of the nation during the rebellion against Rome. Rabban Gamliel was taken to Yavne by Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai after the destruction of the temple, so that he became known as Rabban Gamliel of Yavne. After Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai's death, Rabban Gamliel presided over the Sanhedrin. Under Rabban Gamliel's leadership, Yavne became an important spiritual center. The greatest of the sages gathered around him, including Rabbi Eliezer, Rabban Gamliel's brother-in-law, Rabbi Yehoshua, Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabban Gamliel sought to create a spiritual center for the Jews that would unite the entire people, a role filled by the temple until its destruction. Therefore, he strove to enhance the prominence and central authority of the Sanhedrin and its Nasi. His strict and vigorous leadership eventually led his colleagues to remove him from his post for a brief period, replacing him with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. However, since everyone realized that his motives and actions were for the good of the people and were not based on personal ambition, they soon restored him to his position. We do not possess many halachic rulings explicitly in the name of Rabban Gamliel. However, in his time and under his influence, some of the most important decisions in the history of Jewish spiritual life were made. These included the decision to follow Beit Hillel, the rejection of the halachic system of Rabbi Eliezer, and the establishment of fixed formulas for prayers. In those halachic decisions attributed to Rabban Gamliel, we find an uncompromising approach to the halakha. In reaching his conclusions, he was faithful to his principles. We know that two of his sons were sages, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, who served as Nasi of the Sanhedrin after him, and Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel. Okay.
Thank you, Sharon. So just to give a little background who these people were, and so you have a family discussion here. Rabbi Eliezer, who was the brother-in-law of Rabban Gamliel, and so, but there was an incident going to be mentioned right now that showed how far did Rabban Gamliel go in his attitude. It says, "Ma'aseh abo banav mi beis hamishter." So Rabban Gamliel's sons went to a wedding. They came home from the wedding. It was late at night, right? Amru lo, so they said to their father, "Lo karinu eshma." They said, "Pop, we went to the wedding. We were having a good time, and we forgot to say Kriya Shema." So in our weddings, there's always a mar of minyan. Maybe there wasn't a minyan, who knows what. But they didn't say Kriya Shema. Now it's late, right? And they know that Rabbi Gamliel said until 1/3 of the night, right? So what's going on over here? This is this is the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, the brother-in-law, said only till 1/3 of the night. Now 1/3 of the night had passed. It's late at night. So what should we do? Amar lahem. So Rabbi Gamliel said to his sons, "Im lo ala amud hashachar," if the morning star has not risen, in other words, the dawn has not broken, chayavim latem lekros. You are still required to say Kriya Shema. V'lo zu bavad amru, and not only that, ela kol ma she'amru chachamim ad chatzos. Every time that the sages, the majority, say ad chatzos until the middle of the night, mitzvasan ad sheyala amud hashachar. Really, it means, says Rabbi Gamliel, until dawn. So midnight and dawn are not the same, right? But he's saying if they say midnight, it really means you have until dawn to accomplish it. So, of course, and they give some examples. Hekter chalavan ve'varim mitzvasan ad sheyala amud hashachar. So parts of the sacrifices were placed onto the altar, depending on which sacrifice it was. Some of them were entirely burned, some of them were partially burned, some of them the fats, the entrails. So when they were supposed to be placed onto the altar for burning, the mitzvah was until daybreak, until the morning star rose. And there are certain sacrifices that were eaten by the Kohanim or by the owner of the sacrifice, and certain of them could be eaten. There was a time limit. You could eat it for that day that it was sacrificed and into that night. So when it was a one day, one night, so then it's again ad yala amud hashachar until dawn, till daybreak. In Cain, so if that's the case, asks the Mishnah, lama amru chachamim ad chatzos. So why, if daybreak is the limit, why did they say until midnight? Kedei lahartik adam and haverim, to distance us from Aveira. So maybe you can think of other examples of times that actually are extended in order to prevent people from having an avera. So, for example, Friday night, right? When we light candles Friday night, do we actually light them at sunset? No, not really. We light the candles 18 minutes early. Why is that? Because give yourself a little margin for error. So in other words, to distance you from the ability to commit a sin. So they're saying, yes, you have until daybreak to say Kriya Shema, you have until daybreak to eat the balance of the sacrifice and so on, but better get it done by midnight.
Same is true for Nida.
For what?
Nida.
Exactly right. So, and that's something that women took on themselves to prevent the possibility of making a mistake, right? So even though it's not strictly the correct observance, but they extended it. Right? Okay, that's the mission. So it's our basic rule is the time that we're allowed and actually required to say Kriya Shema. So the Gemara is going to ask an interesting question right away. So the Gemara starts, Tana hecha koi dekatonim emasai. So where do they get the idea? Why do they say from when? Why do they ask this? The Sue further, Maishna detani ba'arvis v'reisha. Why did they talk about the evening before the morning? Generally speaking, activities start during the day and they continue into the night. So why do we start with Kriya Shema? Like, our most important prayer of the day is Shacharis. It's the most extensive. That happens in the morning. So why does the mission start talking about Kriya Shema at night? Why not start with the day?
At night. Our days start at night.
Very good. And that's gonna be one of the answers. So he says, Tana Akroi Koi. So first of all, the way that the mitzvah is given to us in the Torah, it says Diksiv, B'shach B'cha Uvukumecha. When you lie down and when you get up. So what are they saying first? When you lie down. Okay, that's number one. V'achikitani, and so we learn Zman Kriya Shema D'Shechiva Emas. When is the right time when you lie down? Mishah Sheha Kahanim Nichnasim Lechol B'Trumasa. The time that the Kohanim come in to eat the Truma. And this, we touched on this last time, but what does that mean? That the Kohanim, when they can eat the Truma. So it's talking about a situation where Kohanim, Truma first of all was the first gift that was separated from the crop. So if Mindel and I are farmers and we bring in our wheat crop, and now before we can eat it, we have to do certain things, right? So the first part that we have to separate and give as a gift is the truma. And the truma was given to the Kohanim. No set amount is mentioned in the Torah, but the rabbis settled on basically 2%. So if you were very generous, you gave 1 in 40. If you were stingy, 1 in 60. But the average person gave 1 in 50, 2%. So, but the truma was consecrated. It was holy. Only Kohanim could eat it. But if a Kohen were tameh, somehow or other, he came into contact with a corpse, or a particular dead lizard or something, or he had an emission, and he was now in a state of tumah, he could not eat the truma. So what would happen is, if it was a type of tumah, impurity, ritual impurity, that lasted for 1 day, so he would go to the mikveh during the day, and then when the day passed, when it became nighttime, that was the time that he was completely removed from the situation of tumah. So he's not allowed to eat the truma until nightfall. So that's why they used that measurement, because it was when the night arrived, when the day passed, that's when the Kohanim could eat the truma. So that's when Kriya Shema is first obligated at that point. So, okay, V'yiboy Sema, or you could say another possibility why they start with Kriya Shema, because Yalek B'Briyoso Shalom. You learn it from the creation of the world, right? Iksiv, right? And it's very famous. We all know it. We know it by heart, right? Vayerev va'avoker. Tiksiv vayerev va'avoker yom echad. So first it was evening, then it was morning, one day, which means that evening comes before. So we're going to start out talking about, we're going to start the entire discussion in the Gemara. We're going to start talking about the requirement for prayer. We're going to talk about the essential prayer of all. We should start the way the Torah starts. Starts evening and then morning. Okay, so we've got two reasons, right? Ihachi, but if so, says the Gemara, Sefer the Katani. So the Mishnah, the way that the book is set up, this was done by the printer, the original printer of the Gemara. This was printed in 1523, I think, by non-Jewish printer named Bamberg in Venice, and he had the license from the Pope to print the Talmud. Now, it seems kind of weird for us to think about it, but way back when, most of the books, the ones that were written, were manuscript, and in order to have permission to print it, the Pope had to give a license. And the Pope gave Bamberg a license, and when he did it, he had the Mishnah, and he had the Gemara, and the Mishnah and the Gemara corresponded to each other. So he broke it up. He, or the Jews that were working with him, the Mishnah is actually, the first whole chapter is one long Mishnah. That's the way it was originally done. And in order to make it usable, in order to make it so that people could study it the way we are, they broke that long chapter of the Mishnah up into little paragraphs. And then you're going to see, as we go along, you'll come to another Mishnah, which is another paragraph, and then the Gemara will be explaining. So when they say Sefer, it means the end, it means later on. So in the same Mishnah, even though it seems like it's happening a lot later, so this is on Daf Yud Aleph, page 11, the Mishnah continues, and I'll just read it to you. It says, B'shachar mevarach shtayim lefaneha v'achas lachareha. So when we daven in the morning, we daven Shacharis, so there are two brachos that we say before Kriya Shema, and one after, okay? And with Erev, mevarach shtayim lefaneha shtayim achareha. And the evening, two before and two after. Achas arucha v'achas ketzar, one long one, one short one. So the Gemara is saying, gee, if the evening one is more important, maybe that's why the evening one is listed that way. But the Gemara says, if so, why then do we say, explain that the 2 in the morning before they say the 2 in the evening, or the 2 in the 1, 2 and 2 in the morning, 2 and 1 in the evening. So when they're explaining it, they're talking about the morning one before the evening one later on, right? So if the evening one is the essential, the more important, as our mission seems to be, so why that? He says, listening to Arvis Berachot. So then give us the explanation, or give us the rules relating to the evening one before the morning one. So Kana Pasach Arvis V'Hadar Kane B'Shachris, because he started with the evening, then he mentioned the morning, and now as long as he's talking now he's talking about the morning prayer, Parish Milei B'Shachris, V'Hadar Parish Milei Arvis. In other words, he's what is he doing? He's saying, first he says the evening, right, and then he mentions the morning, and now once he's on the morning already, he continues with the morning, then he finishes up with the evening. So it's like sort of to save time. In other words, that's kind of the way that they're operating. So basically, they're saying there's not a problem with the way that it's organized. Okay, so now we're going to try to examine why does the Mishnah tell us the time that they eat the time that Kriya Shema has to be said. Why doesn't it just say what time? Why does it have to tell us the story about the Kohanim? What's the point of that? In other words, if you say that the right time is at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, don't tell me when the school bus passes by. That's not you're telling me parenthetical information, right? So the Gemara says, Amar Mar, Mishah Shakahanim Nefnasim Lechol B'Trumasan. So the Mishnah said the right time for saying Kriya Shema is when the Kohanim eat their truma. In other words, when the day has passed, right? Mikvah, let's examine this. Kohanim emas koachle truma. When can they eat their truma? Mishas tzeisa kolchavim. The rule is when the stars come out, right? So, and we know what that means. That means 3 medium-sized stars, not 3 small stars, not 3 large stars, 3 medium-sized stars. So, listening mishas tzeisa kolchavim. So what are you mixing me up for? Why don't you just say that the right time to say Kriya Shema is when the stars come out? Why are you bringing the issue with the Kohanim into the discussion? Right? You got that, Naomi?
Mm-hmm.
So what's the point? So Milsa Aga Urcha Kamashma is giving us some extra information. What is that? Kohanim emas koachle b'truma. When is it that the Kohanim eat from the truma? Mishas seisa kolchavim. When the stars come out. V'hakam Ashmalan is coming to teach you the kapara lo ma'akva. So what is that talking about? That the issue of kapara. So when somebody brings an offering, so they have to. They bring it because of the fact of the kapara for it's like an atonement for the person who brought the offering. So what's going on here? It's coming to teach us here that why is it talking about Kriya Shema beforehand? Because the kapara for the sacrifice is not what's the fact that he went into the mikvah. That's not the issue. It's the point of it is when the time has appeared. So because the fact that he had to go into the mikvah and he has to bring a special sacrifice too if he became tummy for certain reasons. So that is letting you know that was not essential to the process for the Kohanim to be able to eat the truma. So in other words, he's got to go into the mikvah, the day needs to pass, and he has to bring a certain sacrifice, but it's telling you the sacrifice is not essential. It's the passing of the day which determines when the Kohanim can begin to eat the truma again. So, Kedasan, yes, we learned in a brisa, Uva Shemesh V'Toher. So the listing, the way that the words are listed, the sun set and then he became pure, right? Bia Shimshom Akvato Milechol B'Truma. The setting of the sun is what determines when he can begin to eat truma again. Then Kaparasum Akvato Milechol B'Truma. And it's not the fact that he brought the sacrifice. The sacrifice is out there, he still has to bring it to complete his process, but he can eat the truma at that point. Okay, so Mimai Dahai Uvah Shemesh Bias Hashemesh. So since it says the setting of the sun, that's the sunset, I v'toher Tahar Yuma Duma Bor Bias Orohu. So maybe it's the setting of the fact that the sun has gone down. Mimai v'toher. What do you mean, and he became pure? Tahar Gavra, that the person himself has become purified because he went into the mikveh, the day has passed, he still has to bring the sacrifice, but he himself has achieved a certain amount of purity that he can eat the truma now. Amar Rabba Bar Shila. So we're on the second page now. I guess you're following along in English or the Hebrew. Imkain Lema Krov Vayithar, Mai V'Taher. So what do you mean? Say he became pure. What does it mean? He became pure. Tahar Yoma. It means that the day has passed. Kidamri Inchi, as people say, Yarav Shimcha V'Idake Yoma. That the sun is going to set and the day will end. So B'Marava had the Rabba Bar of Shila Lo Shmilu. But in Eretz Yisrael, don't forget, they say in the West, because this is, the Gemara was written where? The Gemara, the primary center for the study of the Gemara was in Babel, right? Which we say today, it was, it's Iraq, right? That's where it was. And so that is to the east of Eretz Yisrael. So they say, whenever they say B'ma'arava in the West, what they mean is in Israel, because there were people studying in Israel just as well, right? So they didn't hold with this opinion. And so they have a question, Shemesh, so when it says the sun set, it's talking about the sun, and what does it mean? And he has become purified. So maybe it's just that the light has gone out. Is that talking about the person himself has become pure? And now to give you another, a brisa is something that was written at the same time as the Mishnah was written, so it's contemporary to the Mishnah. It's authoritative like the Mishnah, but a brisa means outside. It was not included in what was originally printed, right? But it's just as authoritative. So when they'll quote a brisa, they'll say that it seems to be maybe contradicting the Mishnah. It says, "Sima l'davar tzeisa kol chavin," and it says what is our indicator that the night has come? The stars coming out, right? Shema mina. Therefore, we can conclude Bia Shimshahu Oma'ivataher Tar Yoma. It's that the sun has set and it's the day has passed.
So, the thing that's always puzzled me about this is, so they're saying you should eat when the Kohanim sit to eat their truma. But isn't it easier for, Job and Adam sitting somewhere to know when the sun is going down? Like, they're not in his line of sight, so how does he know the Kohanim are sitting down? It's not something they do in public, they do it in their own space.
Right.
So how do you know that the Kohanim are sitting down so that you know that you can say Shema? It would be easier to look up at the sky and see the sun setting than it would be to figure out if the Kohanim are eating.
Exactly right. So you're asking the same question that the Gemara asked. The Gemara said, what are you mixing in what seems to be extraneous information, right? And as a matter of fact, today, do we know when Kohanim are eating Truma? No, because they're not eating. We don't know who the Kohanim are really, and people are not separating Truma in the same way. And so, and it's certainly here in Boynton Beach, Florida, it's a different situation altogether. So it's the time sunset or beginning of darkness, the three stars. So the Gemara says that the reason that the Mishnah told us in this way is to give us additional information. And the additional information is, when do the Kohanim, when does that actually happen?
Okay.
That happens at the beginning at nightfall, which is the three stars. And so we can understand from what they said that that's what applies to us. That it's when the night falls. And so every time that, everything that's written in here, it's sometimes, it seems like maybe there's extraneous information, but every line has something, another message for us.
It always feels a little bit like stream of consciousness.
Stream of consciousness, the Gemara.
When you're writing and things sort of, you hop around a little bit and things sort of
Maybe.
you can't always see
it
clearly
roams.
the connection. Stream of consciousness writing, it's actually a technique.
We roam around to get to the point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
And you touch on, suddenly you're on a new topic, stuck in the middle,
Yes.
or whatever.
How'd
Okay.
that happen, right?
But it seems like it's also a process of elimination. If this, then that. And what if this, then if you have this, then maybe you should have that.
That's why.
And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you're going to see sometimes they'll say a particular item, and they say, why did you mention that? It's to let you know that other things don't apply. It's specifically to these, something like this. So that's part of the fun of the whole thing, is to try to understand it's like we said, maybe some people didn't come because they're in an exercise class. This is a terrific exercise class too.
For the brain.
Because, right, your most important muscle is being exercised right here. Okay,
Interesting.
so continuing on, Omar Mar, Mishasha Kahanim Nichnasim Lechel B'Trumosan. So we said that the Mishnah said, and we've been repeating it, that this happens, that we say Kriya Shema from the time that the Kohanim come in. So, and that doesn't mean that we have to look around to see if there are any Kohanim in our neighborhood and if they're eating the Truma. We don't have to do that. We can know what the right time is by looking at the sky, or today we don't have to do that. We have a fixed calendar, we have a clock and so on. But, I'll ask you a question. From when do we say Kriya Shema in the evening? Oh, so here's another example of a time which was, I guess, well known to them, right? And when the poor man came into his house, I guess he finished his day's work, and he had a meager meal, and he ate his bread with salt. Until the time that he finishes the meal. So he might eat that small meal for an extended period of time. And that's the time when we're supposed to say Kriya Shema. So, Seifa Vadai Pliga Masnisin. So the Seifa, that's what we just quoted a few minutes ago about the end of the Mishnah, says, it certainly seems to be a disagreement, difference of opinion. Reisha Milema Pliga Masnisin. So is there is this the fact that the poor man is eating his bread with salt, and the time is until he finishes his meal? That seems like a shorter period of time, doesn't it? How long can he eat that bread with the salt? And yet we say it can go until midnight or possibly dawn. So is that not a difference of opinion or a contradiction? It says, lo, ani v'kohen chad shiuruhu. It's the same length of time. And even though it seems like it should be shorter for the ani, but it seems like the same length of time. From what time do you start saying Kriya Shema? From the time that people have their afternoon meal on Friday afternoon. Divrei Rebbe Meir, says Rebbe Meir. Chachamim omrim, and now there's a difference of opinion here. They say Mishah Kahanim Zakaron Lachol B'Trumasan. From the time that the Kohanim can eat their truma, and what is it? Simon L'Dover Tzeisak Kachavim. And again, so we've had several different examples, different times. They're all relating to the same time, but at different situations. And what you can remember to this, a Simon L'Dover, it's a sign, a symbol. You can remember when the stars come out, right? And even though I can't prove it to you, the Gemara is saying, but I can give you a memorial to it. Shenamar, anachnu osim b'malacha v'chetzia machzikim b'remachim ha'alos ha'shachar ad sheisa kochavim. So we do our work, and everything continues until from dawn until evening. V'omer, he says, v'hayavan alayla mishmar v'yom malacha, and the nighttime is a time for watching, for guarding, and the daytime is for working. So I'm going to ask you a question. Suppose I work the night shift, and I get up at 10 o'clock at night. I've got to be in at 11, and then I get off work when it's getting light. When do I say my Kriya Shema? Does it apply to me, to my schedule, or is it nightfall? So Rashi says, and we're going to just take a look at the Rashi. So if you're using the Hebrew, so if you remember, this first part is the Mishnah, then we started the Gemara. Rashi is over here. Tosos, which is basically an expansion on Rashi, and it's done by his sons-in-law, his grandsons, And so Rashi says that in terms of when do you start, it says that it relates to the time for everybody, the physical time. It's not your time. So the evening time is when it's dark, and the morning time is when it's light. It has nothing to do with how your life operates. So it doesn't depend on when you get up and when you go to sleep. Okay? So he says, "V'hayulon halayla mishmar yom halacha." Ma'ava omer. What do you mean? He's saying, "V'chitema miki arva shimsha leiliyahu." So you're going to say that when the sun sets, that's nighttime. V'inu de machashvi umakdimi, and we, we get up when it's dark, right? We work at night, right? Tashma v'hayulon halayla mishmar yom halacha. So for us, that was the time. The night was the time of watching and guarding and so on, and the daytime is for work. Kasaka daitach. So we might think the ani ubnei adam chad shiruhu. So maybe it's the same time period for the poor person and also for other people who are not poor. Yamrid ani v'kohen chad shiruhu. So, and you're going to say that the ani and the kohen are also the same length of time. He said, Chacham Hainu Rabbi Meir. So what did Rabbi Meir just say? So Rabbi Meir said that it's the time when people come in to have their meal on Erev Shabbos, right? So it seems like he is saying the same thing as there. So why do we mention him at all if he seems like he's agreeing with the other people? He says, "Lo, ani v'kohen chad shiruhu, ani v'bnei adam lav chad shiruhu." The poor man eating his bread with the salt, and that's the same time that the kohanim would eat their truma. But people coming in at the end of the day from their work, that's a different story. So the Gemara asks, "Ani v'kohen chad shiruhu." He said, really, one specific time that they both agree when the ani when the poor man has his bread with salt, and the kohanim eat their truma. He says, is that so? I'll ask you a question. Again, when do we start to say Kriya Shema at night? Rabbi Eliezer. Now we bring in a different opinion. Rabbi Eliezer says it's the time when we say Kiddush, we start Shabbos on Friday afternoon. Right, which is a little bit earlier, right? Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Mishasha Kanim Tahorim Lechol B'Trumasa. So Rabbi Yeshua says it has to do with nightfall again, when the Kohanim, right? Rabbi Meir Omer, now you get a third opinion, Rabbi Meir, Mishasha Kahanim Tovlin Lechol B'Trumasa. From the time that they go into the mikvah to eat the truma. Amalo Rabbi Yehuda, so Rabbi Yehuda, now fourth opinion. Hello, Kahanim Yom Hem Tovlin. But wait a second. We said that they go into the mikveh during the day, right? Because generally speaking, the mikveh is used during the day, except for women who go at night. For that's for a modesty reason. So generally, the mikveh, the man goes to the mikveh during the day. And now you're telling me it's when the night happens. Rabbi Chanina says, he says when the poor man eats his bread with the salt. Rabbi Yachai, Rabbi Acha, another opinion, it's when most people come in to sit down and have their meal. So now we're going to get back to, is the poor man and the Kohen are the same length of time? Rabbi Chanina, Hainu Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Chanina agrees Rabbi Yeshua. So basically, we're talking about a lot of different opinions, right? Which we said it seems like we're sort of getting off the track a little bit, but he says, Ela lav shma mino, we can include shiura d'ani l'chud v'shiura d'kohen l'chud. Shma mino. We can indeed so conclude that the situation with the poor man is not the equivalent of when the Kohen, and we go back to where we started, And so why is it people want to know, why does the Gemara spend so much time giving so many different opinions when we're going to settle on what we started out with? And there's very good reason for that. And that is that, you know, we said that the Torah is alive, right? And we're all part of it. So if all it did was it gave us the first rule, let's say, and that when the Kohanim come in to eat their meal, that's the time they eat their truma, that's the time that we say Kriya Shema. So if that's all it said, over the centuries, somebody else could have come along and said, well, what about this? What about the poor man? Or what about the working man? Or what about this and that? And if we didn't have an answer for it, the whole thing could collapse, because people could say, well, you know, like somebody once said to me, well, I'm a man and Rabbi Akiva's a man, so why can't my opinion be just as valid as his, right? So, but it's because his opinion was tested. He brought it up 2,000 years ago, and maybe Rabbi Yeshua responded to him, and the discussion went back and forth, and we settled on something. So that's why they'll mention a lot of times things which don't seem to be exactly relating to our topic, or maybe they seem to possibly be contradicting, but they test these different answers, and they come out with what is the final answer. So so somebody can't come along and say, well, what about this? Well, yeah, that's a good point, and the Gemara brought it up, and this is how they settle. So that's the point. That's why we have I don't know if you were counting, it must have been about half a dozen different opinions, right? But we came back in the end to what we started with. Okay, so where are we time-wise? And we will continue, God willing, with this fascinating topic next week. Thank you.
So, move on to
You can stop now.
Yes, so this is left